On a misty November morning in 2009, in the quiet village of Cheryanad in Kerala's Alappuzha district, a scream shattered the pre-dawn silence that would add another hair-raising crime story to the vault of Kerala police. The sound came from a modest two-story house where the American dream had come home to roost, and where an elderly man who had spent 35 years building a life in New York was about to become the victim of one of Kerala's most calculated murders. The woman who screamed was a maid who had served the household faithfully for years. What she discovered that morning would expose a web of digital deception, family betrayal, and cold-blooded murder that used 21st-century technology to orchestrate a crime as old as human nature itself. This is the story of how social media became a murder weapon, and how trust became the deadliest vulnerability of all. The backwaters of Alappuzha stretch endlessly toward the horizon, a network of canals and rice paddies where coconut palms sway in the humid breeze and temple bells mark the passage of time as they have for centuries. In this timeless landscape, the village of Cheryanad represented something entirely modern. The dreams and ambitions of Indians who had sought their fortunes abroad and returned home to enjoy the fruits of their labor. Among these returnees was Bhaskara Karanavar, a man whose life embodied both the promise and the peril of the immigrant experience. Born in Kerala, he had worked in New York for 35 years, saving every dollar and planning meticulously for the day when he could return to his homeland with enough wealth to live comfortably and provide for his family's future. But Bhaskara's American journey had been complicated by challenges that went far beyond the usual struggles of immigrant life. His younger son Binu was physically challenged, requiring constant care and supervision that made independent living nearly impossible. As a devoted father, Bhaskara had brought Binu with him to America, sacrificing personal comfort and social opportunities to ensure his disabled son would never be abandoned or neglected. The house that Bhaskara built in Cheryanad upon his return was more than just a residence. It was a symbol of decades of sacrifice and determination. With modern amenities, solar panels, and a well-maintained garden, it stood as proof that the American dream could indeed be transplanted to Indian soil. The family that gathered under its roof seemed to represent everything that successful immigrant families aspired to achieve. Sharon, a native of Pathanapuram, was married to Binu, completing what appeared to be a perfect family unit. She was educated, modern, and had initially accompanied her husband to America, where she was expected to help care for him while building her own new life. Her marriage into an NRI family had been seen by both sides as mutually beneficial. The Karanavas needed someone to help care for their disabled son, while Sharon's family saw the union as a pathway to American prosperity. For a time, this arrangement had worked well for everyone involved. Sharon had adapted to American life with apparent enthusiasm, learning new systems and customs while maintaining her responsibilities as both caregiver and wife. But beneath the surface of this seeming success, tensions were building that would eventually explode in the most devastating way possible. The first sign that something was seriously wrong came when Sharon was caught stealing from her American workplace. The incident was severe enough to threaten her immigration status and force the family to make a difficult decision about their future in the United States. Rather than risk further legal complications, they chose to return to India, abandoning their American dreams and settling into the retirement home that Bhaskara had prepared in Cheryanad. Back in Kerala, the family dynamics that had been manageable in America became increasingly strained. Sharon found herself trapped in a marriage to a man whose disabilities made their relationship more about duty than desire, living in a rural setting that offered few of the opportunities or excitement she had experienced abroad. The contrast between her expectations of American success and the reality of village domesticity created a deep well of resentment that would soon overflow. It was during this period of disappointment and adjustment that Sharon discovered something that would change everything: the early social networking site Orkut. For a woman feeling trapped and invisible in her daily life, the digital world offered something her real world could not provide: attention, excitement, and the possibility of relationships that existed entirely on her own terms. What started as casual online socializing soon evolved into something much more consuming. Through Orkut's messaging systems and community features, Sharon began developing relationships with multiple men who offered her the emotional stimulation and romantic attention that her marriage lacked. These digital connections provided an escape from the tedium of caring for a disabled husband and the depression that came with watching her dreams collapse in real time. As Sharon's online activities became more intensive, her behavior in the physical world began to change in ways that did not escape her observant father-in-law's attention. Bhaskara had not survived 35 years in American government service without developing keen analytical skills and an ability to detect when something was amiss in his environment. The long hours Sharon spent on the computer, her increasing detachment from family activities, and her obvious dissatisfaction with her circumstances all suggested that some kind of crisis was brewing in his household. Among Sharon's digital relationships, one in particular began to take on special significance. Baisith Ali was everything that her real-world situation was not: exciting, available, and apparently wealthy enough to provide the attention and gifts she craved. Their online romance quickly evolved from casual flirtation into something that Sharon began to value more than her actual marriage or her obligations to the Karanavar family. The relationship between Sharon and her father-in-law had soured for multiple reasons. Bhaskara had questioned her illicit connections and spendthrift nature, and had even canceled a settlement deed. The elderly man who had worked decades to provide for his family's security was becoming increasingly suspicious of the daughter-in-law he had welcomed into his home. As the monsoon season of 2009 gave way to the cooler months of autumn, the tensions in the Karanavar household were reaching a breaking point. Sharon decided to create an atmosphere more conducive to the continuance of her illicit sexual relationship, and to achieve this, she concluded that her father-in-law would have to be eliminated. The murder was not a crime of passion, but a conspiracy hatched over several days. Working with Baisith Ali, Sharon began coordinating a plan that would eliminate Bhaskara while making his death appear to be the result of a random burglary gone wrong. The plot required precise timing, multiple participants, and a level of deception that would test every skill she had developed during her years of hiding her true activities from her family. November 7th, 2009, began like any other day in the Karanavar household. The family followed their usual routines. Meals were prepared and shared, television programs were watched, and the customary preparations for sleep began as they had countless times before. But as darkness fell over Cheryanad, and the sounds of village life gradually faded into the quiet rhythms of night, Sharon began implementing the final phase of her deadly plan. The family's guard dogs, who would normally bark at the approach of any stranger, were the first casualties of the conspiracy. Sharon had carefully drugged them with sedative tablets mixed into their evening food, ensuring that the natural early warning system that should have protected the household would be neutralized. As the dogs lay in unnatural sleep, 3 men began their approach to the house through the shadows cast by coconut palms and mango trees. Baisith Ali, along with his associates Shanu Rashid and Nithin, entered the Karanavar home not as random burglars, but as contract killers recruited specifically for this murder. Their entry was facilitated by Sharon herself, who opened doors and disabled security measures from inside, welcoming her co-conspirators into the home where she had lived as a supposedly beloved daughter-in-law. What happened next in the quiet darkness of Bhaskara's bedroom revealed the full extent of Sharon's betrayal and calculation. The method chosen to kill the 66-year-old man was designed to avoid obvious signs of struggle while ensuring his death appeared natural or accidental. Sharon administered chloroform to her father-in-law, a technique that required advanced preparation and suggested research into how to incapacitate a victim without creating visible trauma. Once Bhaskara was unconscious and helpless, the group suffocated him with pillows, ensuring his death while attempting to make it appear as though he had died of natural causes. But the conspirators were not content simply to commit murder. In what would prove to be a crucial mistake, they attempted to stage the crime scene to suggest that Bhaskara had been killed during a burglary. Chili powder was sprinkled around his body, supposedly to create the impression that thieves had been searching for hidden valuables. A ladder was positioned outside the house to suggest how the supposed burglars had gained entry, and various items were disturbed to create the appearance of a search for money and jewelry. These crude attempts at misdirection would ultimately help investigators recognize that the crime was not what it appeared to be. When the maid discovered Bhaskara's body on the morning of November 8, 2009, her screams brought neighbors rushing to see what tragedy had befallen one of their community's most respected residents. Sharon's performance as the shocked and grieving daughter-in-law began immediately, as she claimed to have slept through whatever had happened and expressed bewilderment at her father-in-law's death. But when police arrived to investigate what was initially reported as a possible natural death or burglary, experienced officers immediately began noticing details that didn't match the explanations they were receiving. The drugged dogs were the first major red flag, as was the implausible positioning of the ladder and the amateur nature of the supposed crime scene staging. The chance of burglars breaking through the house and evading the dogs was nearly impossible. Suspicious, police checked Sharon's phone call records. What they discovered would transform the investigation from a puzzling death inquiry into a murder conspiracy of shocking proportions. It was found that 55 calls were made to one number that night, the number of Baisith Ali. This level of communication suggested active coordination rather than coincidental timing, and created a digital timeline that corresponded exactly with the period when the murder was being executed. Inspector General Vincent M. Paul supervised the investigation, bringing decades of experience to what would become one of the most complex cases of his career. Under his direction, investigators began exploring not just the physical evidence at the crime scene, but the digital relationships and activities that had apparently motivated the murder. The investigation revealed that this was one of India's first major criminal cases, where social media evidence played a crucial role in both establishing motive and identifying perpetrators. Sharon's Orkut activities provided a digital trail that led investigators directly to her accomplices and revealed months of planning that had preceded Bhaskara's death. Physical evidence at the crime scene also contradicted the burglary theory that the killers had tried to establish. Baisith Ali's fingerprints were found on a cupboard handle, providing direct forensic proof of his presence in the house despite having no legitimate reason to be there. Even more damaging was the discovery of a ring that Baisith had given to Sharon as a romantic gift, found at the crime scene and creating an unmistakable link between their online relationship and the very real murder that had taken place. When police tracked down Baisith Ali, Shanu Rashid, and Nithin in Goa, where they had fled after the murder, the case against all four conspirators became overwhelming. Under interrogation, faced with phone records, fingerprint evidence, and digital communications that documented their planning, all three men eventually confessed to their roles in the murder plot. The confessions revealed the full extent of Sharon's central role in orchestrating her father-in-law's death. The investigation showed that this was not just a family tragedy, but a carefully planned contract killing that used modern technology to facilitate ancient evil. On November 22, 2009, the charge sheet was filed, and the case began attracting statewide media attention due to its combination of NRI victim, family betrayal, and digital age conspiracy. The media attention was intense and immediate. Here was a story that combined elements guaranteed to fascinate and horrify the public. A successful non-resident Indian murdered in his own home by his daughter-in-law, the role of social media in facilitating real-world violence, and the ultimate betrayal of family trust by someone who had been welcomed as a daughter. The case became a symbol of broader anxieties about the integration of returning NRIs into Indian society, the dangers of unregulated internet relationships, and the erosion of traditional family values in the face of modern temptations and technologies. Public reaction was swift and largely condemning, with many observers expressing shock that someone could so completely betray the trust of a family that had provided her with home, security, and opportunity. When the case went to trial at the Mavlikara Fast Track Court in July 2010, the evidence presented by the prosecution was comprehensive and devastating. 96 witnesses testified about various aspects of the conspiracy, while 12 key documents provided the framework for understanding how digital relationships had been transformed into deadly reality. The testimony revealed not just the facts of the murder, but the months of deception and planning that had preceded it. Witnesses described Sharon's changed behavior, her secretive online activities, and the growing tensions in the household that had culminated in murder. The digital evidence showed the extent of her relationships with multiple men through Orkut, and the specific coordination with Baisith Ali that had made the murder possible. On June 11, 2010, the court delivered verdicts that reflected both the heinous nature of the crime and the strength of the evidence against all 4 defendants. Sharon was convicted on multiple counts and sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms, while Baisith Ali, Shanu Rashid, and Nithin each received double life sentences along with substantial financial penalties. But conviction and imprisonment did not end the controversy surrounding Sharon and her case. Her behavior in prison became almost as scandalous as the crime that had put her there. She was transferred multiple times due to misconduct, including illegal use of cell phones and conflicts with other inmates and staff. Most recently, a case was registered against her for allegedly assaulting a fellow inmate at the Canner Women's Jail, continuing a pattern of violence and defiance that had marked her incarceration. Perhaps even more controversial was Sharon's unprecedented record of receiving parole. She was granted 22 separate temporary releases totaling 444 days, far more than typical for someone serving multiple life sentences for premeditated murder. These frequent paroles sparked widespread criticism and allegations that political influence was being used to provide special treatment for a notorious criminal. The controversy reached its peak when, after serving just 14 years of her life sentence, the cabinet decided to commute Sharon's sentence, with the decision based on completing the minimum term for a life sentence. The Kerala government's recommendation to release Sharon sparked controversy, with the government later temporarily putting the decision on hold due to public outcry and questions about whether someone who had planned and executed such a calculated murder should be eligible for early release. The contrast between Sharon's treatment and that of her male co-conspirators, who remained incarcerated, raised difficult questions about whether gender considerations had inappropriately influenced her sentencing and parole decisions. While some argued that women deserved special consideration due to their unique circumstances, others contended that equality before the law meant that gender should not override fundamental principles of justice and proportionate punishment. As we examine this case today, more than 15 years after Bhaskara Karanavar's murder, we are forced to confront disturbing questions about justice, family, and the changing nature of crime in our increasingly digital world. This was among the first major Indian criminal cases where social media evidence played a crucial role in both the commission of the crime and its subsequent investigation. The case highlighted the particular vulnerabilities of NRI families who returned to India with accumulated wealth, but without the local networks and cultural understanding that might protect them from exploitation. Bhaskara's trust in his daughter-in-law, his assumption that family bonds would ensure loyalty and protection, proved to be tragically naive in the face of greed and digital-age deception. From a forensic perspective, the Bhaskara Karanavar case demonstrated both the potential and the limitations of digital evidence in criminal investigations. The phone records and social media activities that proved crucial to solving the case represented tools that investigators were only beginning to understand and utilize effectively, while also showing how criminals could use the same technologies to plan and coordinate their activities. The investigation itself was notable for its efficiency and thoroughness. Under Inspector General Vincent M. Paul's supervision, Kerala police were able to identify the inconsistencies in the crime scene staging, trace the digital evidence that exposed the conspiracy, and track down the perpetrators across state lines within days of the murder. This rapid resolution provided some measure of justice for Bhaskara's family, while demonstrating the growing sophistication of Indian law enforcement in handling complex cases involving modern technology. Yet the case also revealed disturbing patterns in how the justice system handled its aftermath, particularly regarding Sharon's treatment during incarceration and the circumstances surrounding her potential early release. The apparent influence of political considerations in what should have been straightforward applications of established legal principles raised questions about whether justice was truly blind to factors that should be irrelevant to punishment and rehabilitation. The Bhaskara Karanavar murder case serves as a cautionary tale about the intersection of technology, family dynamics, and criminal behavior in modern India. It reminds us that the same digital tools that promise to connect us and enrich our lives can also be used to facilitate betrayal, violence, and the destruction of the very relationships they purport to strengthen. The story of Sharon and her victim also challenges us to think more carefully about the nature of virtual relationships and their potential to influence real-world behavior. In an age when many people form deep emotional connections with individuals they have never met in person, we must consider the psychological and social implications of relationships that exist primarily in digital space, but can have very tangible and sometimes deadly consequences in physical reality. Perhaps most importantly, this case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the fragility of family bonds and the ease with which trust can be betrayed when personal desires conflict with moral obligations. Bhaskara Karanavar had welcomed Sharon into his home, supported her through scandal and disappointment, and trusted her with his life. That trust was repaid with the ultimate betrayal, a murder so carefully planned and coldly executed that it continues to shock us more than a decade later. The case also raises broader questions about the effectiveness of our criminal justice system in dealing with the new challenges posed by digital-age crimes. As technology continues to evolve and create new opportunities for both connection and deception, our legal and law enforcement institutions must develop new capabilities and approaches to protect citizens from those who would exploit our most basic human needs for love, acceptance, and trust. The next time we read about cybercrime or digital relationships gone wrong, we should remember the elderly man who died in his own bed, killed by the very person he had tried to help and protect. We should remember that behind every sensational headline about technology and crime are real human beings whose lives have been forever altered by the actions of others, and that our increasing reliance on digital communication and virtual relationships requires us to remain vigilant about the very real dangers that can hide behind our screens. This is the story of Bhaskara Karanavar, a man whose American dream became his family's nightmare, whose generosity became his death warrant, and whose murder became a symbol of how the digital age can amplify humanity's oldest and darkest impulses. It is a story that challenges us to examine our own relationships, both digital and physical, and to consider the price we might unknowingly pay for the connections we make in our increasingly virtual world. As technology continues to reshape how we form relationships and build trust, the lessons of this case become ever more relevant. We must learn to navigate the digital landscape with wisdom and caution, understanding that the same tools that can bring us love and companionship can also bring us danger and betrayal. The memory of Bhaskara Karanavar demands nothing less than our commitment to using technology wisely and protecting ourselves and our loved ones from those who would exploit our most basic human vulnerabilities for their own selfish ends.